Welcome to Module 3 on the role of an advocate for a trauma-informed approach to advocacy. In this module, we'll be talking about how trauma themes may show up in advocacy efforts, as well as how you can integrate a trauma-informed approach into your own advocacy. This module is designed to provide individuals with a comprehensive understanding of advocacy, focusing on the strategies and skills necessary to effectively champion causes and influence change in trauma. Whether you are passionate about social justice, environmental issues, health, education, or any other field, this curriculum guide will equip you with the tools to make a meaningful impact. Through insights, practical exercises, and real-world examples, individuals will learn how to develop and implement successful advocacy campaigns. By the end of this module, individuals will be equipped with the knowledge and skills needed to become effective advocates. They will be prepared to design, implement, and evaluate advocacy campaigns that drive positive change in their communities and beyond. A trauma-informed approach shifts the focus from what's wrong with to what happened to. There are many resources about trauma-informed approaches on a theoretical level. However, there is still some confusion as to what it entails in practical terms. Many individuals associate a trauma-informed approach with individual level or clinical work, yet that's only one part of the broader framework. So we hope to demystify what trauma-informed practices may look like in the context of policy and being an advocate. Traditional advocacy approaches may inadvertently re-traumatize individuals by failing to recognize and accommodate their trauma histories. Trauma-informed advocacy minimizes this risk by creating a safe and supportive environment that respects individuals' experiences and their needs. So when looking at re-traumatization, what hurts? What can we do between the system and relationships? On this slide, we have adapted a chart created by the Institute of Trauma and Trauma-Informed Care containing system and relationship dynamics that are often experienced as being re-traumatizing. As we do our advocacy work, it is critical to remain attuned to these themes as it informs what we are looking for when we notice problems and devise policy solutions to propose. The fact of the matter, though, is that so many of us are brought to this work because of our own experiences with trauma and adversity. So paying attention to how these themes can also show up in the organizations and groups through which we advocate is vital. We each are accountable to ourselves and others for how we choose to respond, and modeling the model of being trauma-informed and trauma responsive means that we intentionally act in ways that acknowledge the prevalence of trauma and seek to use that knowledge to avoid re-traumatization. So when looking at this slide, the core message of advocacy in communication. What issues are we addressing? Why is it important? Who is affected? And what change do we seek? How to effectively communicate the need for our advocacy efforts. We understand our own needs, and we each have a different lived experience and background. So, how do we bring it all together so that all voices are heard? Effective advocacy begins with clear, compelling communication. Whether advocating for policy change, social justice, or community improvement, articulating the need for our cause is crucial. The next few slides, we will do an activity and work together to outline some key steps and sketch out a strong communication strategy that resonates with our audience and inspires action. First, identifying the core message. First, we need to identify what our core message is. So even before communicating our advocacy efforts, we must define the core message. That core message should answer these questions. Again, what issues are we addressing? Why is it important? Who is affected? And what change do we seek? A well-defined core message ensures that our advocacy is focused and impactful. It should be easily understood by a broad audience while being specific enough to convey urgency and its significance. So, how do we understand what the target audience needs? Different audiences require different approaches. So let's continue to kind of build this together. To effectively communicate, let's consider three of the following. Who needs to hear our message? Is it legislators, community members, donors, or media outlets? What are their values and concerns? How do we align our message with the audience priorities in order to increase that engagement? And then finally, what is the best communication method? Some audiences respond to storytelling while others prefer data-driven arguments. So by understanding our audience, we can craft a message that really resonates emotionally and intellectually, increasing the likelihood of support. But how do we craft that message into a compelling narrative? This step is using more storytelling as a powerful advocacy tool. The compelling narrative includes a relatable protagonist, such as highlighting an individual or group affected by that issue. It recognizes the problem, again, clearly explaining the challenge and its consequences. It shares a vision for change. It shows what positive outcomes are positive within that support. And then there's a call to action, which looks at providing clear steps on how the audience can contribute to the solution. Real life stories humanize data and statistics, making the issue more tangible, but also more urgent. And so, how do we leverage that data and that evidence? Well, while stories evoke emotion, data strengthens that credibility. We look at things such as statistics to demonstrate the scope of the problem, case studies that show real world impact, or expert opinions like your own to validate those claims. Combining that narrative and factual evidence creates a balanced, persuasive argument that appeals to both logic and the emotions. But how do we choose the right communication channels? Well, first, by selecting the appropriate channels to disseminate your message, consider traditional message such as going through the press, having releases, opinion pieces, TV interviewers. Social media is a big factor in being able to engage, such as videos or graphics or live discussions, but also community engagement, where there's town halls, there's workshops, and grassroots organizing. It really has that direct outreach and that direct impact on individuals where you can personalize things such as emails, phone calls, and meetings. You should use a mix of channels that really helps to ensure a broader reach, and it also maximizes the impact. How do we engage those stakeholders and build that partnership? Advocacy efforts gain strength through collaboration. Partnering with organizations, community leaders, and influencers can really amplify what that message is. It can provide that additional credibility, but also increase access to resources and funding. We talked in the last module about building a coalition. And so building a coalition, it really strengthens that advocacy and those efforts and creates a unified voice for change. But then we want to measure that impact and adapt the strategies as we move forward. So to ensure that effectiveness, we can regularly evaluate our communication strategy by monitoring engagement metrics, such as on social media shares, petitions, signatures, gathering feedback from individuals and audience members, having an ability to analyze the response to different messages and different tactics. Once these things have been completed, we can then adopt our own approach based on feedback and results, which will allow us to really refine our strategy for greater impact. Communicating the need for advocacy really requires strategic planning, a clear message, and effective outreach. By understanding our audience, leveraging storytelling and data, utilizing that appropriate communication channels, and engaging stakeholders, you can create a persuasive and impactful advocacy campaign. Thoughtful communication turns awareness into action, ultimately driving that meaningful change. Let's stop here and let's reflect before we move on. Put a word or phrase or sentence in a chat about how you feel about participating and supporting advocacy. We'll pause the video here and give you 5 minutes to respond. Okay, now we're back. Trauma-informed advocacy really fosters trust and engagement by prioritizing transparency, collaboration, and empowerment. When individuals feel safe, respected, and involved in the advocacy process, they are more likely to engage actively and positively with the support that's provided. Trauma-informed advocacy takes a holistic approach to support, to recognize the interconnectedness of mental, emotional, physical, and social well-being. This comprehensive perspective ensures that all aspects of an individual's needs are addressed, and it's also promoting more effective and sustainable recovery. This slide provides information on how that actually happens. Remember, we talked about the 6 principles previously. The core values and principles of a trauma-informed approach each serve a purpose in being able to neutralize the environment. So we, at the very least, do not make things worse when interfaced with people, groups, organizations, and communities that have been impacted by trauma. First, looking at safety. Creating a safe environment is paramount in trauma-informed advocacy. This involves physical safety, emotional security, and a sense of trustworthiness. Advocates must ensure that their interactions do not inadvertently trigger or re-traumatize individuals. 3 keys for safety are: 1, physical safety, ensuring that the environment is physically safe with measures in place to prevent harm. 2, emotional safety, creating an atmosphere where individuals feel respected, valued, and psychologically secure. 3, predictability, establishing consistent routines and clear expectations to reduce anxiety and foster a sense of stability. Just as we strive to increase access to economic resources, secure, stable housing, and legal protections for people who have experienced trauma, we also work with advocates to strengthen their own psychological capacities to deal with the multiple complex issues that come along with interfacing with trauma at such a high rate, especially in an activity like policy advocacy, which can be exhausting when major wins can be few and far between, and volatility can be present. It is important that advocates feel physically and psychologically safe in the work they do. Advocacy can be incredibly rewarding. However, it can also sometimes be tough. Some of the ways that safety can be supported in group advocacy actions include establishing a culturally attuned, inclusive, and welcoming and non-re-traumatizing environment, along with holding intentional discussions about some of the impacts of this work, including concepts like secondary trauma and self-care. Creating safe avenues for heavier conversation in this work is also an approach that can enhance safety considerably. You can also engage in safety by encouraging others and coworkers to have check-ins, meetings, team support, and allow that time and space for this to occur. If you're able to do this, offer that support and express solidarity without colonizing the campaign, thus risking marginalization. In terms of something to pay attention to in policy, often the question of whose safety is asked in trauma-informed policy analysis when advocating. Because many policies may privilege the safety and rhetoric, if not in an actual outcome, of one group at the expense of the well-being of another. For instance, the move from allegedly preserving public safety by criminalizing drug use in ways like restricting access to housing and benefits to supporting the idea that the safety of drug users is also the safety of society, and thus emphasizing prevention, treatment, and recovery support overall arrest and incarceration is an example of how our society can shift to look at the concept of safety quite differently. Next is looking at building trust. Building trust is essential in trauma-informed advocacy. Advocates should be transparent about processes, about policies and decisions, ensuring that individuals understand what to expect and feel respected throughout their interactions. Keys for trustworthiness and transparency are: 1, clear communication by providing clear, consistent information about the processes, about the policies, about the decisions. 2, honesty, being truthful and open to build trust. Three, reliability, following through on commitments and promises to demonstrate dependability. We know that trauma can disrupt our ability to trust and to manage feelings and can affect the way we feel about other individuals, ourselves, and the world. Trust-based relationships really enable a collaborative policy process. And some small steps that can be taken to increase trustworthiness and advocacy is to be transparent about what is known and unknown, as well as what is assumed or hypothesized and what is a fact. It's okay to not have all the answers, and being authentic and transparent in that way can enhance feelings of trust among advocates as well as among trauma impacted community members you may interface with as you engage within this work and within your advocacy efforts. Additionally, communicating in a way that lets individuals know what is expected of them helps tremendously, and also it makes sense to do so. Explaining the rationale behind the decision making and the planning that takes place. Though policy can be ambiguous and unpredictable at times, even when information changes rapidly, having a form of communication that remains consistent when possible can help. Whether that's a time of day you send an action alert, or when you have monthly office hours to answer questions advocates or community members may have about the work you're doing. It's critical to be forthcoming about and allow choice in how personal stories collected may be used and seek an informed consent about where, why, and how their content will be shared to as much extent as possible. Part of that conversation also may entail discussing the potential impacts that individuals may not think about if you're featuring stories on public websites, since at that point the information is out there and not necessarily sometimes that can be controlled. You can also consider integrating choice and safety by having individuals use a pseudonym or just using their first name or removing their identifying factors. From a policy standpoint with advocacy, trustworthiness is generally tied to the transparency of the policy's intended goals or outcomes and the procedures by which these goals will be attained. Several factors have historically and presently limited transparency and trust in social policy, which can make it challenging for those with lived experience to feel as if they want to robustly participate. Our next principle, empowering voice and choice. Empowering individuals involves recognizing their strengths and capabilities, providing opportunities for them to express their needs and preferences, and supporting their autonomy. Advocates should encourage individuals to take an active role in their own advocacy and decision-making processes. Some key points for empowerment and for voice and choice are: one, strength-based approach by focusing on individual strengths and capabilities rather than their deficits. Two, autonomy, providing opportunities for individuals to make choice and have a say in their care. Three, skill building, offering resources and support to help individuals develop skills and confidence. Advocacy links closely to the ideas of empowerment at the institutional and structural levels, and trauma-informed approaches strive to move away from deficit thinking so popular amongst policymakers, stating that social problems originate at the individual level rather than at the institutional level. Similarly, health inequalities and other challenges related to oppression are often linked to particular populations of identification rather than cast as structural features of the US healthcare system that have been shown to have very strong connections to trauma exposure. When we look through a trauma-informed lens, we see ways that are illuminated that trauma-impacted communities and the citizens within them survive institutionalized mistreatment and disenfranchisement by drawing on their cultural values, the agency, creativity, historical memory, which is critical consciousness and fortitude, as well as their experiences of lived resilience. Those are important perspectives and voices to lift up in our advocacy efforts. It is important to consider what empowerment really means here. For the concept of empowerment to be meaningful, it cannot simply mean the process whereby a powerful person or body gives power to people who are powerless. It also has to involve the taking of power by those who need it. We don't necessarily empower others as the powers claim, from within themselves, but instead we can create conditions and contexts in which empowerment is more likely to emerge and support and where we notice it. If you think you are empowering someone and it is on your terms, then they are probably not really being empowered. From a trauma-informed perspective, it is critical that empowerment and social policy reflect not only a rhetoric of liberation, but actual shared power in terms of extending decision-making ability to the target populations of social justice. To shape advocacy and policy so that it better reflects the realities of practice and that lived experience, it is critical that policymakers hear directly from those on the ground and in the community. For advocates, that may mean finding ways to connect individuals with lived experience to legislators, or otherwise find ways to uplift their voice and incorporate their diverse perspectives. Community engagement, capacity building, and other strategies to provide platforms for empowerment in addressing policy shortcomings are discussed in other modules. Promoting choice to be the greatest extent possible has been recognized as a principle of strength-based social policy as well. And this can be built into solutions presented to legislators to advance trauma-informed approaches to policy. Next principle, collaboration and mutuality. Advocacy should be a collaborative process where power is shared between advocates and other individuals. Mutuality emphasizes the importance of recognizing and valuing the individual's input, fostering that empowerment, and active participation in their own advocacy. Within the collaboration and mutuality principle, we can look at three different things. First, shared decision-making, which involves individuals and decisions about their care and support. Two, equal partnerships, by recognizing the importance of mutual respect and shared power dynamics in the relationship between providers and individuals. And three, a team approach, encouraging teamwork among staff and with individuals to foster a collaborative environment. In trauma-informed systems, human rights are seen as collective rights and can include the importance of reverence for community wisdom, mutual trust, and respect, the recruitment of local leaders, and negotiating clear and consistent terms of collaboration amongst all parties. Providing different meaningful ways to contribute based on matching skills, strengths, experiences, and express best hopes for participation can cultivate a more collaborative culture when advocating. It's also vital that advocates working toward a common vision of trauma-informed systems transformation set goals together, as well as share data like evaluation processes and outcomes. Ultimately, collaboration enables advocates to constantly be learning from and alongside one another to align efforts and combine strengths to improve community conditions for all. Our next principle, cultural, historical, and gender issues. Trauma-informed advocacy must be sensitive to the cultural, historical, and gender context of individuals. Advocates should recognize the impact of historical trauma, discrimination, and oppression, and strive to become and provide culturally competent and inclusive support. Culture and gender issues impact trauma through three different things. First, cultural competence, or recognizing and respecting the diverse backgrounds and experiences of individuals. Two, historical awareness, understanding the impact of historical trauma such as colonization, slavery, or systemic oppression on individuals and communities. And three, gender sensitivity, being aware of and responsive to gender-specific needs and experiences. Intersections of multiple oppressions are themselves experienced as traumatic frequently, and this is inherently connected to the struggle for social justice and human rights. Trauma and its repercussions are also not equally distributed in society, because groups that systems impact such that they are placed at the margins of society are more likely to experience some types of current and historical or cultural trauma and generally have fewer resources with which to cope with trauma's negative effects. Trauma-informed approaches can support inclusive outcomes, reframe inclusion as integral to growth by actively moving past cultural stereotypes and biases and retaining that awareness of identity characteristics such as race, gender, and sexual orientation, and the privileges or oppression these characteristics can occur. An important aspect of this value is leveraging the healing value of cultural connections, as well as devising strategies to negotiate dynamics of different and sameness within the context of power related to race, class, citizenship, gender, sexuality, and other factors that challenge us to breaking down structural barriers that deny individuals, families, their rights to live dignified and engaged in their whole lives. These principles are interconnected and collectively create a framework for trauma-informed care that can be applied across various settings, including schools, homes, healthcare facilities, and community organizations. Implementing these principles helps to create environments that are supportive, respectful, and conducive to healing for individuals who have experienced trauma. And finally, our last principle. In a trauma-informed approach, peer support and mutual self-help are key principles that emphasize the value of shared experiences, connection, and empathy among individuals with similar backgrounds or challenges. Peer support and mutual self-help are vehicles for establishing safety and hope, building trust, enhancing collaboration, and utilizing stories and lived experience to promote healing. These interactions help build a safe, supportive environment that's essential for healing and growth, especially within organizations of communities working with trauma. Peer support provides individuals with a sense of safety, knowing that they are not alone and are among others who understand their experiences. By creating these spaces for open communication, individuals feel validated and more willing to share their vulnerabilities without the fear of judgment. Building trust in a trauma-informed setting is essential. Peer-led programs or mutual help groups foster trust because participants can relate directly to each other. Through shared experiences, individuals can feel confident that their peers have similar understanding and will maintain honesty and transparency. Peer support and mutual self-help emphasize the equal, reciprocal relationship between individuals, eliminating those power imbalances. This principle underscores that healing is a collective effort with each individual bringing valuable experiences and insights. Collaboration strengthens a sense of shared purpose and collective healing. Trauma-informed peer support gives participants the opportunity to share their stories by actively listening and provide feedback. It fosters a space where everyone's voice is valued, promoting empowerment and self-efficacy. By providing individuals with choices in how they participate, it respects their autonomy and allows individuals to feel more in control of their healing processes. Peer support programs often account for diverse cultural backgrounds, respecting and acknowledging each individual's unique experiences. Understanding the cultural context of trauma, considering historical or systemic factors, is critical. Trauma-informed peer support groups are often formed around shared cultural, racial, or gender identities to allow for culturally resonant healing and support. Peer support itself is a source of resilience, providing a model for recovery by connecting individuals who have successfully navigated or are actively working through similar challenges. Through shared healing journeys, individuals are empowered to embrace their strengths, envision a hopeful future, and support each other in building that resilience. In a trauma-informed approach, peer support and mutual self-help not only provide emotional and social support, but also empower individuals, helping them regain control over their lives and enabling that collective resilience. This mutual support fosters healing, grounded in a shared understanding that even with traumatic experiences, recovery and growth are achievable within a supportive, empathetic community. Let's now look at this reflection point. How do you already demonstrate commitment to these principles? What do you think is important to pay attention to as you continue to intentionally integrate these principles into your advocacy efforts? We therefore will invite you to consider what you are already doing and how you can make it better, as well as how you can serve individuals and use this as a basis for guiding policy advocacy for your own issues of choice. Here's a quote by Jane Addams. The good we secure for ourselves is precarious and uncertain, is floating in midair until it is secured for all of us and incorporated into our common life. Oppressive behavior reinforces historical hierarchies of power and pulls us back individually and collectively from reaching our full potential. Oppressive systems breed trauma, and by working to undermine oppressive systems in our daily life, as well as in our policy advocacy work, we strengthen our work toward a more resilient, healing-centered, trauma-informed future. Learning about oppression is a lifelong personal journey through which we can strive to learn about issues and perspectives we aren't aware of ourselves. We all have biases we aren't necessarily always mindful of. Trauma arises not only as an experience of isolated violence, but also from compounding hardships, systemic oppressions, discrimination, and significant hardships that individuals who have experienced trauma face. Understanding the intersection of these issues is tremendously important, and a part of being trauma informed is acknowledging and seeking a deep understanding of the communities that we work with, including sociocultural and socio-political history, along with current context intersections of oppression and various forms of trauma that include cultural and historical trauma and other forms being interpersonal and individual experiences. If you're able to do so, offer support and express solidarity without colonizing the campaign, thus risking marginalization. Although no population is immune to experiencing trauma, some types of trauma are disproportionately experienced by certain groups because of these deeply entrenched structural inequalities that constrain agency, civic participation, and progress made to support those whose lives have been impacted by trauma. In order for social justice to be achieved, it is important that our institutions and structures acknowledge the past and the impact of colonization, the ongoing intergenerational harm, the loss of cultural practices, the tokenistic approach to the inclusion, the continued overrepresentation, and the disproportionately related to system involvement. Ideally, the work that we do at advocacy, we all do together with fundamentally changing communities and their structures nationwide, such that the resources and powers are more equitably distributed. This is a lens to look through for every single bill we advocate on for or against. We want to think about how we operationalize those 6 principles from the SAMHSA framework that we mentioned earlier when we are doing trauma-informed work. It is not just about calling ourselves trauma-informed, but it is a commitment to ongoing processes of learning and growth based in these principles and others that are important to the community or organization we are working with. How do we promote that safety, including that physical safety, as well as psychological, social, and moral safety? Are we being transparent and earning others' trust, or do we simply demand it due to those power imbalances? Are we creating conditions of empowerment with voice and choice so that folks are genuinely able to engage and contribute in meaningful ways to the best of their ability? Is true collaboration actually occurring, and do individuals feel valued? And in what ways are we perpetuating oppressive cultures and marginalizing any person or group of people, whether intentionally or unintentionally? And are we building a culture in which we are provided with skills to support, to help individuals support themselves? And what are we building community for? So for peers to feel though they are equipped and able to support others as well. Is that the work that we're doing? We'll never be able to be perfect in doing this, but I believe that being trauma-informed is in the pursuit of living into these qualities more than it is about boasting that we have achieved them. Being trauma informed requires a commitment to an ongoing process of learning and growth, guided by those six principles and other shared values of the community and the culture that's embedded within it. Advocating can be a highly rewarding experience, especially when you see the difference you are making in individuals' lives. However, if you are constantly giving and not taking time to attend to yourself, you may be at higher risk for burnout. Burnout is a state of physical and emotional exhaustion that is often characterized by a loss of passion or a sense of detachment from your advocacy work. This is the human mind and body's natural response to stress, and trauma exposure when caring for oneself is not prioritized. Being trauma informed and trauma informed responsive in any context is a total paradigm shift. There's no checkbox you can check because it is a digestive process in which a high value is placed on self reflection, self awareness, and self care to sustain us while we do this work. Reflection helps us to make thoughtful decisions with knowledge of how our personal reactions and feelings are operating. It's important to pay attention to and acknowledge one's own personal beliefs about their experiences with trauma, as well as respond to the situations appropriately so each advocate can show up well enough to continue to support this important work. I also suggest that you think about how your discoveries through critical ongoing self-reflection can inform your engagement with others, including helping other advocates, colleagues, and other players recognize how their own privileges may shape their ability to work authentically and humbly across differences. When tensions or lapse in engagement arise, consider how it can be related to trauma exposure, firsthand or secondary, rather than reverting back to what's wrong with the person frame. It's important if you are in a leadership role to be cognizant of how much you ask of your advocates. We are all interfacing with trauma and secondary trauma exposure that can be harmful if that's not addressed. It can be especially hard for individuals with lived experience who are actively engaged on all issues in which they are impacted in their livelihoods and perhaps not always seeing the change they would have hoped for. And again, I cannot reiterate enough how important it is for each of us to reflect on the impact of the work that we do, either privately or with trusted others, including supervisors, peers, therapists, family, or friends, or anyone who helps us feel witnessed and understood. Trauma-informed advocacy is a critical approach that recognizes the persuasive impact of trauma and integrates this understanding into all aspects of support and service and provisions. Let's look at these reflection points. What type of advocacy have you done that was challenging? What were you most proud of during your advocacy journey? And what future advocacy might you take part in? By adhering to the principles of safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, cultural sensitivity, advocates can create a supportive environment that promotes healing and empowerment for trauma survivors. Implementing trauma-informed practices requires ongoing training, changes, and a commitment to continuous learning and adaptation. Ultimately, trauma-informed advocacy leads to improved outcomes. It reduces the risk of re-traumatization and enhances trust and engagement, and is comprehensive support for individuals on their recovery too. We here at CTIP, we deeply value the work each of you are doing and what you've already done. We appreciate your past and present, the individual and collective efforts to create a just, equitable, resilient, and trauma-informed society. We continue to remain hopeful and committed to collaborating and building this momentum within this movement. And rest assured knowing that advocates like yourselves are creating a more equitable, transparent, collaborative, just, resilient, and healthy society that will be better to help support the wellness of all individuals and ultimately disrupt the intergenerational transmission of trauma. We look forward to seeing you in the next few modules. Thank you.